Welcome back to Compassion Over Silence. I'm Rashida Saunders. Today we're talking about trust. And I could begin with leadership. I could talk about psychological safety. I could talk about organizational culture. I could talk about why people speak up, why they stay silent, and what makes someone feel safe enough to tell the truth. But if I'm being truthful, my understanding of trust began long before I became a leader. Long before I became a police officer, long before I had language for emotional intelligence or organizational culture, I learned about trust as a girl. And some of what I learned, I had to unlearn as a woman. I wrote about parts of that journey in Permission to Break. And one of the hardest things I have had to understand about myself is this. I learned to read a room before I learned to trust one. I knew how to study faces, tone, silence, energy. I knew how to tell when something had shifted. I knew when to speak, when to wait, when to make myself smaller, when to stay quiet, when honesty might cost more than silence. I knew how to pay attention to what people were not saying. I knew how to sense tension before anyone named it. I knew how to prepare for what might happen next. At the time, I would not have called that emotional intelligence. I would have called it survival. Actually, I probably would not have called it anything. When you are young, you do not always have language for what you are learning. You just learn. You adapt. You pay attention. You figure out what keeps the peace, what makes things worse, what version of you is safest in the room, and then you grow up. And something interesting happens. The skills you develop to survive start getting praised. You're so observant. You read people well. You stay calm under pressure. You anticipate problems. You're independent. You don't need much. You can handle difficult situations. You know how to get things done. You're strong. And listen, those things can be strengths. They have been strengths in my life. They helped me navigate difficult environments. They helped me become resilient. They helped me in public safety. They helped me lead. But here is what I have had to confront as an adult. Some of the skills that later made me look like a strong leader were born in environments where I did not always feel safe. Think about that. Reading the room, anticipating problems, staying composed, managing emotion, becoming highly independent, knowing what people need before they ask. Those qualities can look exceptional on a resume. They can earn praise, promotions, responsibility, leadership opportunities. But sometimes, what an organization calls leadership potential is a survival response wearing a blazer. I know. Sit with that one for a second, because I had to. And the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable the question became. What happens when someone who learned not to trust becomes responsible for creating trust for everyone else? What happens when the person expected to create psychological safety has spent most of their life surviving through self protection? What happens when we ask leaders to give people something they have rarely experienced themselves? That is where I want to begin today, because one of the questions I've been thinking about lately is this. Why is it so difficult for people to give one another the very things we all need most? We want trust. We want empathy. We want understanding. We want belonging. We want grace. Yet those qualities can feel surprisingly rare. We ask parents to be patient, teachers to be encouraging, leaders to be trustworthy, caregivers to be selfless, public servants to be compassionate. But we rarely stop to ask, what have they experienced? Who taught them trust? Who modeled repair? Who showed them that disagreement did not have to mean rejection? Who taught them that mistakes could be corrected without humiliation? Who showed them what it felt like to tell the truth and still be safe afterward? Because a leader who has never experienced trust may struggle to extend trust. A person who has rarely felt seen may find it difficult to help others feel seen. Someone who has spent years feeling judged may struggle to lead with grace. Someone who learned that mistakes are dangerous may become a leader who needs everything controlled. Someone who learned that questions expose weakness may become a leader who pretends to know everything. Someone who learned that disagreement threatens relationships may create a team where everyone smiles and nobody tells the truth. That does not make people incapable. It makes them human. Human beings learn through experience. We often give what we know. We reproduce what has been modeled for us. And sometimes we reproduce what hurt us. That is the part people do not like talking about. Sometimes we become the very thing we promised ourselves we would never become. Not intentionally, not because we are bad people, but because unexamined patterns do not disappear simply because we receive a title. You can get promoted and still be afraid of conflict. You can become a supervisor and still need everyone to like you. You can become an executive and still experience disagreement as rejection. You can become responsible for an entire organization and still be that younger version of yourself inside, reading the room, watching faces, trying to figure out whether you are safe. The title changes. The nervous system does not automatically get the memo, and that matters because leadership gives our unexamined patterns more reach. A defensive person becomes a defensive leader. A controlling person becomes a controlling leader. A person who is terrified of mistakes may create a culture where mistakes are hidden. A person who learned that emotions are weakness may punish humanity in everyone around them. A person who survived by staying silent may unintentionally reward silence in others. That is why trust is not just a leadership technique, it is personal. It asks us to examine what we learned about people long before anyone gave us authority over them. And I have had to do that work myself. Because I can tell you that I value trust. I can tell you that I believe in honesty. I can tell you that I want people to come to me. And I do. But I also have to ask myself harder questions. What happens when the truth is inconvenient? What happens when someone disagrees with me? What happens when feedback threatens the story I tell about myself? What happens when someone I love says, "You hurt me"? That is a moment. And I have learned that sometimes my first instinct is not connection. Sometimes it is explanation. I want to explain what I meant. I want to provide context. I want to make sure they understand my intentions. I want to say, that's not what I was trying to do. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe my intentions were good. Maybe I genuinely believed I was helping. Maybe I remember the situation differently, but I have had to learn something that is not always comfortable. People do not experience our intentions, they experience our reactions. And sometimes the moment after someone tells us the truth matters more than everything we have said about trust before it. That is why I believe trust is built in moments, not the kind written in a mission statement, not the kind discussed at a leadership retreat, not the kind that appears on a slide next to words like integrity, excellence, and collaboration. I mean actual trust, the kind that determines whether someone tells you the truth, whether a person brings you a mistake before it becomes a crisis, whether someone walks into your office or walks right past it and people are always collecting information about us. Always. Not in a creepy way. Although apparently this season I need to keep clarifying that. But people are paying attention. They notice what happens when someone disagrees with us. They notice what happens when bad news arrives. They notice whether our patience disappears when we are stressed. They notice whether the person with the title gets more grace than the person without one. And most of the time, they are not announcing that they are evaluating us. There is no clipboard, no formal assessment. Nobody walks into the meeting and says, "Good morning. Today I will be determining whether you are emotionally safe." That would actually be helpful. At least we would know. Instead, people watch quietly. They collect moments. And based on those moments, they make decisions. Can I tell her? Can I disagree? Can I admit I made a mistake? Can I ask for help? Can I say I don't understand? Can I tell the truth here? That is how trust is built. And that is how trust is lost. Usually not all at once. In moments. Some of the most important moments in leadership look completely ordinary from the outside. Someone comes to you and says, "Can I tell you something?" That is a moment. Someone says, "I think we may have made a mistake." That is a moment. Someone disagrees with you in front of other people. Definitely a moment. Someone tells you something you absolutely did not want to hear at 4:47 on a Friday afternoon. A very specific kind of moment. And listen, I believe in trust. I believe in openness. I believe in honest communication. But I also believe some conversations should be illegal after 4:30 on Friday. I'm just saying. Because sometimes somebody walks in and says, "Do you have a second?" And you already know, no, no, I do not. Because whatever is about to happen is not going to take a second. But here is the thing, the person standing in front of us may remember our response long after we forget the conversation. We are often participating in moments that feel small to us and enormous to someone else. Think about a young person for a moment. A child walks into the room and says, "Can I tell you something?" And before they even finish the sentence, we have a choice. Do we look up? Do we keep scrolling? Do we sigh? Do we immediately start correcting? Do we make the moment about our disappointment? Do we create enough room for the truth to finish arriving? Because sometimes people test trust with small things before they bring us big things. We assume trust is built when something major happens, a crisis, a conflict, a difficult decision. But sometimes trust is being built on a random Tuesday. Someone asks a question they are embarrassed to ask. Someone admits they do not understand. Someone brings you a concern that is still half formed. Someone says, "This may be nothing, but," and what happens next teaches them whether to come back. That is why I keep returning to this idea. Trust is tested in the next 5 seconds. Someone tells you they made a mistake. The next 5 seconds matter. Someone disagrees with you. The next 5 seconds matter. Someone says, "I don't feel comfortable with this." The next 5 seconds matter. Someone tells you, "You hurt me." The next 5 seconds matter. Your face, your tone, your silence, your breath, whether you interrupt, whether you become defensive, whether you roll your eyes, whether you immediately begin explaining yourself. The next 5 seconds may teach someone more about trust than the last 5 years of your leadership speeches. And I have seen this in organizations over and over again. A leader says, "My door is always open." I love that phrase. My door is always open. Okay. But what happens when somebody actually walks through it? Because an open door is not the same thing as an open leader. You can have the most open door in America and still have a team that knows better than to tell you the truth. People learn quickly. They learn whether "I want your feedback" actually means "tell me what you think," or "tell me what you think as long as it confirms what I already decided." They learn whether questions are welcomed, whether mistakes are discussed or hidden, whether bad news should travel quickly or quietly. They learn whether disagreement is treated as engagement or disloyalty. And here is what is fascinating: leaders are often the last people to know when trust is disappearing, because people rarely schedule a meeting to announce, "Just wanted to let you know I no longer trust you." That would be remarkably efficient. No. They adjust. They become careful. They share less. They stop bringing half formed ideas. They stop asking questions. They tell you what they think you want to hear. They have the real conversation somewhere else. Remember that parking lot from episode 1? Apparently, we are building an entire leadership curriculum in the parking lot. But that is what happens. When honesty does not feel safe in the room, it finds another room. And that is why trust is not built through mission statements. It is built through moments. Every conversation teaches people something. Every interaction communicates something. Every decision tells people what matters. As leaders, we are always teaching. The question is whether we are teaching trust or teaching fear, whether we are teaching belonging or teaching people to protect themselves. Imagine someone on your team makes a mistake, not a catastrophic mistake. Nobody is calling legal. We are not on the news, just a mistake. They come to you. They are nervous. You can see it. Maybe they start with, "So, something happened," which is never how anyone begins a story with a happy ending. Something happened. Okay, what happened? And in that moment, before you even know the full story, your body may react. Your face changes, your shoulders tighten, your mind starts calculating consequences. Maybe you are frustrated. Maybe this mistake creates more work for you. Maybe you warned them. Maybe part of you wants to say, "I literally told you this would happen." And maybe you did. Maybe you absolutely told them in writing, twice, with bullet points. And now here we are. That is a moment. because accountability still matters. Standards still matter. Consequences may still matter. Trust does not mean pretending mistakes are acceptable, but the way we respond teaches something beyond the mistake itself. Do we teach, bring me problems early, or hide it until you can no longer hide it? Do we teach, we can examine what happened, or your first job is protecting yourself from me? Do we teach accountability and dignity can coexist? Or mistakes make you unsafe here? That one interaction may shape the next 10 decisions that person makes about honesty. This is where I think leadership gets deeper than personality, because this reaches far beyond individual leaders. Families shape people, organizations shape families, communities shape organizations, culture shapes communities. Everything is connected. When we see conflict, division, disconnection, loneliness, mistrust, our instinct is often to ask, what is wrong with these people? Why are they so defensive? Why won't they communicate? Why does nobody speak up? Why do people keep leaving? Why can't they just trust leadership? A better question might be, what conditions made these behaviors more likely? Because sometimes the person we call defensive has spent years being punished for being honest. Sometimes the employee we call disengaged stopped offering ideas after the fifth time no one listened. Sometimes the young person we call difficult learned that adults are inconsistent. Sometimes the community we call distrustful has a very long memory. Sometimes the team that will not speak up has already been taught what speaking up costs. Too often, we try to fix people without examining the environments they are trying to survive inside. But people do not exist apart from their surroundings. Every environment teaches, every culture teaches, every leader teaches, whether intentionally or not. And this is where I have to bring the conversation back to myself, because it is easy to see what other leaders get wrong. The harder work is asking, what are people learning from their moments with me? Do I interrupt, become defensive, say I want feedback, then struggle when I receive it? Because trust is not built by what I say, it is built by what people experience. And maybe that is where this comes full circle. I learned to read a room before I learned to trust one, but healing has required me to ask a different question. What kind of room am I creating for someone else? So this week, pay attention to the next 5 seconds. When someone brings you bad news, disagrees with you, or tells you something you do not want to hear, pay attention to who you become, because that is where trust lives. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Compassion Over Silence. If this conversation resonated with you, follow the podcast and share it with someone who needs it too. Until next time, remember this: what kind of room are you creating for someone else? Leadership, humanity, honest conversations.